vikten av mod och också ljus i att vara med och skapa andra saker. Jag tänkte faktiskt när jag läste om nästa talare så fick det mig att tänka på en av mina favoritcitat, nämligen att det är vårt ljus och inte vårt mörker som skrämmer oss. För ibland tror jag att vi blir rädda för mörker, utan ibland kan vi vara rädda för vårt eget ljus. Så att man frågar sig, vem är jag just för att kunna vara så här fantastiskt strålande, skapa? Och i det här citatet så blir vi påminda om att vikten av att vara i sitt ljus, för det gör också att människor runt omkring sig blir inspirerade i att våga vara i sitt ljus. Desto fler människor som lever i kärlek och ljus och inte styrs av rädsla, desto mer öppnar det upp och man blir just inspirerad av att göra det. Och nästa talare är verkligen en sån person som när man läser om och träffar blir så här, men plötsligt så vidgas en vyer och man känner så här, det är möjligt. Och framförallt just möjligt att inte styras av rädsla och styras av övertygelse om människors lika värde och använda sin kapacitet och sin potential för att driva förändring som ger andra fler möjligheter. Det är en stor ära att lämna över scenen till Fadumo Dayib. Varmt välkommen.
Good afternoon. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. I don't have a speech. I tend to speak from the heart. And I hope I'll be able to share my journey and perhaps see how that fits into the narrative that we're creating in this auditorium today. I am Fadumo Dayib. I came to Finland as a refugee in 1990. I remember it was October, and you might be wondering what happened before that trip, before that journey to get me here. And that starts with actually my family story, because there's no way I can explain where I am today without actually giving you a background of where I came from, so that you can see where I'm going to and how that all fits together. I am the product of two wonderful, resilient Somali parents. One was a nomad. Her nickname was Gorbachev. She was a very strong woman, illiterate, but she had a head for numbers. You could just give her any sum, and while you were struggling with your calculator, she could automatically tell you what the sum was. That was my mother. She was married off at a very young age, lost 11 children to treatable diseases, conditions that could be cured, and unfortunately that a lot of Somali children are dying of. She was told to migrate to Kenya. Maybe she would have children who would survive. And she said, okay, being Gorbachev, she was going to do that. She traveled with her young brother. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Somali map, but they went to a place called Jubaland, Kismayo. And there was a young man, well, not so young, but that's what my father would have probably liked to hear, who was a truck driver. He came from a family of farmers, and he had run away at a very young age because he was born from a mother who was perceived to be of a lower caste. She came from a clan that was what is called currently the 0.5 or the subhumans. It's very similar to the caste system. And so instead of being allowed to move into the family compound, my father grew up with his mother outside of the family compound, farming on his father's land as a slave with his mother, who was never good enough for his father. He ran away at a very young age, became a mechanic, and then became a truck driver. And he was in Kismayo on that day when he met Gorbachev. By the way, my father's nickname was Elvis. And being the womanizer that he was, he asked for my mother's hand from my young brother, and they got married on their way to Kenya. I was born in a very beautiful, lush place called Tika to two undocumented parents, illegal immigrants. I was born into displacement. I was a sickly child. Fortunately, when I survived my first year, my mother said, if this child survives, her second name will be Deka. So my parents and very close relatives and friends call me Fadumo Dayib. Deko means the sufficient. She said she is sufficient to me if this is all I have. Now, my father being the truck driver that he was, he would leave my mother, and she was very lonely. She was not able to integrate into the Kenyan society because she didn't speak the language. So she would come normally to the road, expecting to see Somali truck drivers that she would speak to. And being a business-oriented woman, she quickly understood whenever she stopped a truck and they got out and she would offer them tea, that this was actually a way of making money. So she went from selling tea to selling food and having a restaurant by the roadside. And when my two younger siblings arrived, she had already moved to a place called Mombasa, had a hotel and a restaurant, being a very resilient woman. Now, my mother, as I said, could not read and write, but she had raised all of her siblings, who were all boys, and she gave them a good education. When she was in Somalia, she was one of the first women to actually work in construction. She would drive this big bulldozer, and you know, when you lay out the tarmac, there's this roller actually that rolls out the tarmac, and she used to drive that. And her salary was actually one Somali shilling, which was really a lot at the time. Now, from there, being illegal immigrants in Kenya, they always had to go into hiding. But because they were not integrated into the society, and because they didn't invest a lot of time in that society, knowing that perhaps one day they would be deported, I didn't have actually a very sound educational foundation. Whenever they thought I was not able to speak Somali or I was becoming too Kenyan, I would be taken to Somalia because they feared really integration. To them, integration meant that I would give up on being a Somali and become something else. And so being really shuttled between the two countries, I unfortunately did not have the opportunity to get a sound education. On the second time around, when we were moved back to Kenya, I was able to actually have a very good discussion with my mother on the importance of education, on integration. I managed to persuade my mother to force my father, whom they had separated at the time, to sell his only truck so that they could pay for my school fees. She sold everything that she had to make sure that I would actually have an education. I started reading and writing at the age of 14. And I was able to persuade her because I told her that I believed I wanted to become something in life, that I actually had the potential to become something if I were given the opportunity. And it was a tough thing to actually persuade and influence my parents to take that step, because really that truck was the sole means of their livelihood. But she really had the feeling that, yes, I could become something. Now, it is not enough to just tell somebody that you want to become something. It is also important to be able to get that person on board to really see the world through your eyes as a young child, so that they can understand why they must do what they're doing. And so Gorbachev and I would go on taxi drives every Saturday. It is not like we had a lot of money, but it is important really to visualize your goals so that you can understand where you need to get to. And so she would say, okay, Fadumo, if you grow up, what do you want to be? And at the time in Kenya, every young person wanted to be a secretary in the United Nations. So I want to be a secretary. I want to work in the United Nations. And so we would drive from the slum areas of Isli, which is Little Mogadishu, and come to Gigiri, which is where the UN headquarters in Nairobi is. She would say, Fadumo, look at those gates. And they were really very opulent looking, you know, posh. And she would say, one day you would walk through those gates. And I would try to say, no, but I can't even read and write. She'd say, no, that obstacle is in your head. You will one day walk through those gates. And she'd say, Fadumo, now that you are working with the UN, where do you want to live? I want to live in Spring Valley, where those white Mzungus, those white people live. I want to go there. And she would say, let us drive there. And she'd say, where do you want to live? And there was a compound, a particular compound, which I liked. And I would point to it. And she would say, one day you will live there. And I would try to say no, but she would just shut me down and say, no, this is what you will do. Keep that in your mind, retain it. And we will drive from there. She'd say, where do you want to shop? I'd say, okay, I want to go to Nakumatt, where everyone in Nairobi who is rich shops at. And we would go there. And she'd say, where do you want to go from here? I'd say, I want to go to Sarit Center. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Kenya. It's a shopping mall where where people who are well off go to. And we would go there. And she'd say, what do you want to do? Oh, I'd like to shop in Sarit Center. And there was a particular bookstore, and we would go there. And since I really wasn't very good at reading and writing, I would walk around, pick up the books, find, cartoons. And even up today, when I have nothing to do or when I have a lot of time, I go to a bookstore, and just the smell of books is a wonderful feeling. It really reminds me of where I am today and how hard it was to get there. And so every Saturday, this is what we would do. And she became part of that. And she understood that really education was very important. It was the key to my freedom, but also her freedom. Because really, it is about gaining intellectual freedom as well as economic emancipation. Once you have these two things, then no one can dictate to you. No one can tell you what you should do and what you shouldn't do. No one can shoot down your dreams. You are halfway to your destination. That experience got my mother and I very, very close. We became almost like twins. And so when in 1989, the Kenyan government decided they were going to deport us, along with first, second, and third generation Kenyan Somalis, And the only common thing we shared was our ethnicity. My cogent memory of that experience really is being given a white card that said, go home. I thought home was Kenya, but apparently my ethnicity meant that home was Somalia. I think that was the best gift the Kenyan government ever gave to me, the Kenyans gave to me, because I had always felt restless, like something was missing. And so when I landed in Mogadishu as a refugee, I must remind you, I was born into displacement, then actually became a refugee in Mogadishu in 1989. When the war broke out, my mother had to sell everything that she had again so that she could send my sister and my young brother and I to a safe country. At the time, we didn't know which country that was, what that meant, but what I knew was that I was going to be given a responsibility that was beyond my years. But then again, it's not like I had a childhood. I was never a child. I was a mini adult. And so when my mother had that talk with me and she said, now, you are tasked with taking these two young children to safety, I had once again to really negotiate and persuade someone who was more powerful to be able to allow us to leave Mogadishu. And that was a Russian official at the Air Float office. And when I spoke to him and I told him that we didn't have enough money to be able to bribe a go-between, you know, there are agents that you pay who will get you the visa, the ticket and everything. But we didn't have that. My mother and I would have to queue up every morning just to wait and see until maybe an official would come out of that office. And one day when he came out, I spoke to him. And he said, I will not promise you anything, but come to the airport. This is the last flight out of Mogadishu. If you're lucky, you will get on. If not, there's nothing I can do for you. So that night, I had to have a long talk with Gorbachev about what that mission entailed. And I'd never thought I would have that kind of discussion with my mother. But I knew that it wasn't going to be an emotional discussion because Gorbachev did not show any emotions. And this was not really about small mundane things. It was about life and death. Either I would take them to safety or we would all die on the way to our destination. And we were supposed to go to Romania, Bucharest. So that day we come to the airport. I didn't have time to say goodbye to my mother. By the way, she was the best thing I have ever, the best person in my life at the time. So we cross the security checks and we get to the departure, you know, the lounge to sit there. But the funny thing is with the Mogadishu airport, there was a glass, so the other person is actually standing on the other side. So I see my mother on the other side of the glass. But before we could even think about that, the Russian official comes to me and he says, unfortunately, the flight is full, you cannot get on, so it's about to depart. And I understand that this is really the moment that I'm going to have to persuade an adult person to allow us to get on a flight that is full. And I told him, I said, do you see that woman on the other side of the glass? She lost 11 children. Are you a parent? He says, yes. I said, she only has 3 children, and these are the children that she has. If you were in a similar situation, what would you do, and what would you want your how would you want your children to be treated by someone who is powerful as you are, who actually decides who gets to live or die? Because the moment that flight takes off, you know what happens to young girls in a country that is entering conflict. He said, hold on a minute, walked off, he had a walkie-talkie, came back. The plane which was actually moving came to a standstill, stopped, they put up their ladder, 3 men got off, and he, told us to get on. And so as we walk, my mother is saying, go, go, go. I tell my 2 younger siblings to go ahead, but I am still looking back. I'm thinking, oh, but I can't leave her. She has to come with us. You can hear the, gunshots. You can hear the anarchy in the background. And you're thinking, no, but you cannot leave your own parent in a situation like that. But she's like, go, 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 leave, go. So I walk, but I'm still looking back. We get on the flight. And as it takes off, now I started just crying, because I couldn't cry in front of Gorbachev. I wanted her to be proud. So once the plane takes off, there are no people to see you, no one knows you, no one cares. So I start crying. And there was a Tanzanian lady sitting next to me. And she said, what's wrong with you? And I said, I left my mother in Mogadishu. She's actually down there. And she said, you know that you're going to Moscow and it's winter, you're not dressed for winter. I said, what do you mean? I'm wearing my African dress and I'm looking fabulous. I think that should be enough. And she said, no, you're not dressed for winter. You're not supposed to dress like this. So I'm thinking to myself, how interesting. And she speaks about snow, and it's cold and it's this. And then I said, you're assuming that we will actually land in Moscow. We are on transit. And she says, no, but if you land, you can actually get a day visa. I said, day visa, really? Yeah. And how much is it? It's $25 US. Okay. So when we land, we are put in a transit holding place. And my brother, who was with us at the time, and my young sister. And by the way, he had a very funny-looking hairstyle. He had hair that was growing on his forehead. It looked terrible. And he had the shape of his head was very interesting. And so we used to make fun of him as a young child, that, my God, you are being punished, and I don't know for what, to have this kind of head and then hair. But it came actually, it was useful. His head was useful and the hairstyle was useful. There was a Russian official in that place who was fixated by this head and the hair. And he came over and he started speaking to us in Somali. It turns out he used to work in Somalia. And he would just, walk around, look at his head, touch the hair, and I was a bit worried, like, what's wrong with this man? And after we told him why we were there and that we wanted a day visa, he said, I can get you the day visa provided you allow me to go with this young boy. The 2 of us will get the day visa. And I'm thinking this is very fishy. First of all, no one would be interested in my brother's head and hair. And second of all, how strange that this man would be speaking in Somali. But then I understand, for the first time in my life, I would have to make I would have to take a decision as to whether I can allow my brother to go off. I am responsible for the 2 of them. I'm supposed to get them to safety. We need the day visa. We don't have enough money to be able to go to Bucharest. If we go there, we're going to die. If I let him go off with this man, something horrible could happen to him. But I have to rely on my gut instinct and tell my brother that if anything were to go wrong, if he attempts anything, you have to run off. And off they go. In the same holding place is a young Somali man who is hysterical. He keeps on walking back and forth, holding his head. Oh, we are done for, we are dead. And I tell him, no, nothing is going to happen to us. Gorbachev told me everything would be fine. And he's like, who's Gorbachev? I'm like, no, you don't know what I'm telling you, we will be fine. And he says, no. So he keeps on giving his watch, he gives money, he gives everything. And, they tell him they will be back, and they never come back. And he keeps making all this noise, all this negativity, and I tell him, no, I have a talisman from Gorbachev, and everything will be fine. If she says we will be fine, she'll be fine. And he doesn't understand what I'm talking about. After 20 minutes, my brother comes back with the Russian man. Now, I must tell you, as my brother was walking off, in addition to really wondering what would happen if he didn't come back, because he had all the money that we had that, sewn into his trousers. Every little penny that we had was actually sewn onto his trousers. So if he didn't come back, it meant we didn't have even 1 cent, in addition to everything else that I had to worry about. So when he came back, they had the day visas, and the official said, I will walk you to the exit, and you must leave. On the way to the exit, I see our bags. Well, actually, it's one bag that is having everything, our photo albums, everything that was dear to us, everything that represented our past. Everything that had my mother's familiar smells, the cookies that she had put in there, the halwa that she had put in there, because she knew that the only way I would agree to anything was if she would give me sweets. And they were in that bag. And so I was walking past. We couldn't take the bags anyway. We had to leave them. Managed to get on a taxi. Went to a place where there were a lot of Somalis. In 2 days' time, we would be on a flight to Helsinki with one drunk Finnish guy sitting in the background singing Finnish songs. That was my first exposure to the Finnish culture. Finnish songs, all the way to Helsinki. So when we landed in Helsinki, that night, I stayed in a motel that is just here. And I knew that if I ever wanted everything and I didn't have the means, I was in a country where I would be able to study, I would be able to do everything that I'd dreamed of. I was in a country that was giving me opportunities. And I decided I would never, ever squander any moment, any minute in this country. And from that night, I hit the ground running, and I have been running ever since. I was taken to a Finnish course. The teacher was a Savolainen, red flowing hair. And she had made it her mission that we were going to learn the language no matter what. And so she would really yell, Ikuna, Ovi, jump here, jump there. And we said, yes, we don't speak the language, but we are not deaf. And she would laugh and she would say, I want you to hear this loudly in your head, even when you're sleeping. And that was happening every night. And so I understood, from having theoretical language courses, I would have to actually practice Finnish. And there was a nearby pub. Now, the Finnish culture is very important if you want to integrate into this country. So the pub became a point of culture where people would go, they would get drunk. I would attempt to sing a few songs, and by the way, my voice is lousy. If no one was reacting, it meant it was okay for me to start speaking to them in the Finnish language. And I would speak to them. They wouldn't correct what I was saying, but they would talk. And within 6 months, I was able to speak and Finnish. As a result of going to this pub, I started actually getting to know a lot of the Finns who were living in that area. Now I must accelerate my narrative. What I want to say is that integration really is very, very important. Yes, as a Muslim going into a pub and as a woman, it was really not something that I was used to, but I understood if I wanted to learn this language, which I wanted to, it's the key to this society, then I must really get out of my comfort zone and go to this pub and speak to my neighbors. From there, I went into a vocational school. I did auxiliary diploma in nursing. From there, I did a bachelor's in nursing. In 1992, my mother was brought to Finland. And then, of course, we resumed dreaming together, and we would pass in front of the Kuopio University, and she would say, you'd go in here one day, and I'd say, no, I don't know the language. And she said, you would go in there. And in 1995, she became very sick and suddenly died. But when she was dying, she died a literate woman, because when my mother came here, she started reading and writing as well. She learned how to read and write. And that was really to show us how important it is. When you come into a country, you learn that language, you learn how the society operates, the norms, the values, so that you can actually move forward ahead, with your life. She also had Finnish friends. Now, from there, I became the first refugee, Somali refugee woman to ever work in a Finnish clinical setting, in a specialized care setting. I became the first Somali female refugee to graduate from a Finnish university. In 2013, I also became the first Somali refugee woman, 2013, to ever get into a Finnish university to do her PhD. From 1990 October to 2013, it took me this long to get into a Finnish university to do my PhD. And as a result, to be the first Somali refugee woman to do that. Of course, it's nothing to be proud of, considering when we came into the country in 1990 and how long it has taken us to get here. But you have to start from somewhere, and that is what we're doing. In terms of integration, when I was working in the Finnish healthcare system, I learned that the language is really very important, but also the culture. We would always speak about the culture, and I would say, but what is the culture? Tell me what the Finnish culture is. And no one would actually specifically point to any aspect of what that culture meant. And I said, listen, I've been in this country from 1990. I have been to the sauna, although it was a very traumatizing experience. When my family friend decided they would invite me to their place without actually giving us adequate information as to what going into the sauna entailed, and standing there bewildered as the family was sitting in this dark room, all naked, and I was wondering what I had put myself at, only to run away from that area and to try and stand behind the house, wondering how to get back to the refugee center, only to have the whole family run again to jump into the lake. And I have been through that. I have eaten kalokuko. I have listened to epunormali, jikarjalainen. At what point of time do I become part of this society? When do you say you have done 1, 2, 3 in order for someone to be integrated? Or is it a never-ending process, even after having been to the Finnish sauna? And at the time, I tell you, I was so keen to be integrated into this society. I was not wearing a headscarf. I was modeling. I was a model in this country initially. I did everything that I thought was expected of me. No one had ever told me what integration meant. Because if you give people a goalpost, then they can walk, towards that. If you say you have to meet the 5 criteria, these 5 criteria, and then you become integrated, and then you become a Finn, I think people will really do that. But unfortunately, we have not been able to do that. We have not even defined what culture is. We have not really defined what acceptance in this society is, what multiculturalism is in this society. And my understanding is, after all these years, and I'm very blessed, I must tell you, compared to a lot of refugees in this country, I am not the norm. My experiences cannot be really generalized to say, every migrant should be like Fadumo, every refugee should, be like that. I was blessed, but I was also really motivated. I wanted to become something. I wanted to make something of myself. And so integration is a two-way street. You are coming to the middle, and the host society has to come halfway to meet you. Either, if you don't do this, it doesn't work. You find the country is really putting in a lot of money in an initiative that has not been clearly defined. And so we don't want to really stigmatize refugees. We don't want to blame migrants. Everyone who comes here wants to be part of this society because they don't have a society. They left everything they had. But if you don't define this society, how are they going to come in? Now, we have to define what culture is in this society. And we also have to really have a dialogue with the refugees, with the migrants. It is the only way forward in this society. And we must also ensure that the people who come into this country are not really left to their own devices. The people who came with me in 1990, 90% of them, after they got their Finnish citizenship, left the country. The 10% that is here has not integrated. They have not studied the language. Some of them don't work. They've never, ever been to a workplace. And this is expected to go on for how long? And so I will end with this note. We have to be innovative in this country. When I came back from the UN, I worked with a private company here. I piloted a scheme whereby we were able to employ directly from the reception centers refugees who were given positive decisions. We were not demanding language because we felt that you can only learn the language at the workplace. If you go to the healthcare system, the language demanded there is different from if you go to the service sector, And so we felt that the person would go to a workplace and they would give them their Finnish language at the workplace and also really accommodation. That was successful. We started off with 4 Eritreans. And those guys really worked day and night. Whereas a Finn was doing 20 boxes. They were in the logistics area. The Eritreans would do 40 boxes. Not because language was an issue. Now, depending on which area they would want to go to, of course, if you have to work in the healthcare, you would have to speak fluent Finnish, because it's about you're saving lives. You can't just go there and start to learn the language. But in sectors whereby language is not really the main issue, I think we need to focus on that. But I would like to end this. I don't think I even have time for questions, do I? I don't. But I'm still here, and we can perhaps meet outside of the auditorium to talk. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for really taking the time to listen to me, and for the Nordic Council of Ministers for inviting me all the way from Mogadishu. Thank you very much, and enjoy your day.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Extremely inspiring to hear your story, and very touching too. And it was a big privilege to be able to, it was like we were looking into, could have the possibility to look into chapters of a very big story. And that's amazing also always to be reminded that so many, like Alice was saying, that when we talk about people, that they are human beings, and we're all like big books. And some of the chapters you can see on us, and none of the chapters you can't. And that's why it's so important to have dialogue and try to be reminded to know your own book and also to read other stories. Now we will have the opportunity to have coffee. Jag tror jag skiftar till svenska. No, I can continue in English because you don't have the translate. I could say so much and I have so many questions for you, but I know here, at least in Sweden, it's very, very important with fika. It's like really, really important. So we will have time for coffee. And before you go, I will just give you something to take with you. And it's what, at a conference once, actually, a man came up to me and he was like, Soledad, you behave like a typical American. And I was like, oh, what's that? And he's like, do you know what differentiates a Swede and an American when there are conferences or like in mingle opportunities? And I was like, oh, maybe the Americans are a little bit more forward. And I said, yes, Americans think this is now he starts generalizing, but he said, Americans say this is a great opportunity to meet new people. So they go into the conference and think, oh, who is that? And he goes forward to them and says, hola, or hi, actually, or hey. My name is Soledad, what's your name? What do you do or play with? And start talking. And Swedes always think like, who do I know in here? And they're like, oh, yeah. So, and then they go to that person. And I think a combination, it's a good recommendation to say hi to the people you know, but also take the coffee break as an opportunity to meet new people and to broaden your network. So, and we will gather here again at 3:15. So please have a great coffee break.